The security camera, timestamp, read 3:47 a.m. When Karen Morrison slipped through the backyard fence for the third time this month, she expected crystal-clear chlorinated water, her stolen midnight sanctuary. Instead, she found herself sinking into something thick, golden, and impossibly sweet. As the viscous liquid pulled her down, coating her designer pajamas and filling her mouth with an overwhelming taste of wildflower honey, one terrifying thought pierced through her panic. This wasn't an accident. Someone had been watching, someone had been waiting, and now, as she fought against the honey-thick water that seemed to resist her every movement, Karen realized her reign of entitled trespassing had just triggered. Something far more dangerous than she'd ever. The August heat had been relentless. For weeks, turning Sarah Chun's backyard into a furnace by day and offering little relief even after midnight. She pressed her face against the cool kitchen window, watching the moonlight dance across her swimming pool's surface. 3 weeks since she'd caught Karen Morrison, her insufferable neighbor, floating naked in her pool like she'd owned the place. "You can't prove anything," Karen had said that night, wrapping herself in Sarah's own pool towel with shameless audacity. "And even if you could, what are you going to do about it? Call the police over a little swim." The memory still burned. Sarah's fingers tightened around her coffee mug as she remembered Karen's smirk. The way she'd strutted across Sarah's deck in dripping designer underwear, leaving puddles on the expensive teak boards. The woman had stolen more than just a swim sheet, stolen Sarah's peace of mind, her sanctuary, her one escape from the suffocating corporate job that kept her working 16-hour days. Sarah had installed security cameras the next morning, expensive ones with night vision and motion detection. She'd also changed the pool locks, reinforced the fence, even planted thorny bushes along the property line. But Karen Morrison wasn't the type to be deterred by mere obstacles. She was the type who called the homeowners association when Sarah's grass grew 2 inches too tall, who reported the Chen family's holiday decorations as culturally inappropriate, who had somehow gotten Sarah's teenage nephew arrested last year for loitering with intent when he'd been waiting for a ride in his own driveway. The motion sensor alert chimed on Sarah's phone at 3:43 a.m. Her heart hammered as she pulled up the camera feed. There she was, Karen Morrison, 43 years old and acting like an entitled teenager. Army crawling under the fence gap she'd clearly been monitoring. Sarah watched her neighbor dust off her silk pajamas and approached the pool with practiced confidence. But this time would be different. Sarah had spent the last 2 weeks preparing. She'd researched, experimented, and tested her theory with small containers in her garage. Honey, as it turned out, could dissolve in water under the right conditions. Not completely, it would never be truly invisible, but enough to create a viscous, clingy consistency that looked deceptively normal under pool lights. She'd used 40 pounds of raw wildflower honey, dissolved gradually with heated water and specialized equipment borrowed from her friend's commercial kitchen. The process had taken hours, and the pool now held 8,000 gallons of what appeared to be normal water, but felt like swimming through liquid amber. Karen reached the pool edge and dipped her toe in, testing the temperature. Sarah held her breath, watching through the high-definition feed as her neighbor's face registered confusion. Karen crouched down, trailing her fingers through the water with a frown. "What the hell?" Karen's voice carried clearly through the night air. For a moment, Sarah thought Karen might leave, might finally show a shred of common sense and retreat to her own property. Instead, Karen Morrison did what Karen Morrison always did. She doubled down. "Probably some eco-friendly pool treatment," Karen muttered, loud enough for the sensitive microphones to catch. "Rich people and their organic everything." Sarah wasn't rich. She was drowning in student loans and a mortgage she could barely afford, working herself to death to maintain a middle-class facade in a neighborhood full of people like Karen, who assumed everyone else's success came easily. But Karen had never bothered to learn anything real about her neighbors. She only saw what served her narrative, that everyone around her existed for her convenience. Karen pulled off her silk top and matching shorts, revealing a black La Perla set that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly car payment. She perched on the pool edge, dangling her legs in the honey-thick water. "This feels weird," Karen said, but she was already lowering herself into the water. Accepted her slowly, like thick syrup embracing a spoon. Sarah watched Karen's expression shift from confusion to alarm as she realized the liquid wasn't responding. Normally, instead of supporting her weight and allowing easy movement, it seemed to cling to her skin, creating resistance with every motion. The Karen tried to push herself back toward the edge, but her movements were sluggish, inefficient. The honey water held her like a gentle but persistent embrace. Sarah's pulse quickened. She hadn't intended this to be dangerous, just unpleasant enough to teach Karen a lesson. But watching her neighbor struggle against the viscous liquid, Sarah felt a dark satisfaction she hadn't expected. Karen's breathing became labored as she fought against the water's resistance. Every stroke toward the pool edge seemed to require tremendous effort, and the honey water clung to her hair, her skin, weighing her down. "Help," Karen called out, her voice cracking with the first notes of real panic. "Somebody help me." But Karen had chosen 3:47 a.m. for a reason. The neighborhood was dead asleep, and her own husband was traveling for business at fact she'd announced loudly during her last backyard phone call. as if broadcasting her availability to the entire street. Sarah's finger hovered over her phone. She could call 911. Should call 911. This had gone further than she'd planned. But then Karen managed to grab the pool edge, hauling herself halfway out with tremendous effort. Honey water poured from her, body in thick golden streams, and her designer lingerie was completely ruined. Stained amber and clinging to her skin like a second, suffocating layer. "You psychotic bitch." Karen screamed toward Sarah's house, her voice raw with fury and humiliation. "I know you did this. I'll sue you for everything you have." Even now, even trapped and terrified, Karen's first instinct was to threaten and blame. No apology for trespassing, no acknowledgement of her own behavior, just rage that someone had finally pushed back. Sarah watched Karen struggle to her feet on the pool deck, honey water still dripping from her hair and skin. Her neighbor looked like some ancient sacrifice, golden and glistening in the moonlight, beautiful and terrible and completely transformed. But Karen Morrison wasn't finished. She never was. "You think this is over?" Karen shouted, stumbling toward the fence, her movements still sluggish from the honey coating her body. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. No idea what you've just started." As Karen disappeared into the night, leaving sticky golden footprints across Sarah's carefully maintained deck, Sarah realized her neighbor was right about one thing. This was just the beginning. The next morning, Sarah would discover that honey water, while initially satisfying as revenge, had consequences she hadn't considered. The pool would take weeks to clean, requiring professional equipment and costing thousands of dollars. Her homeowner's insurance would ask uncomfortable questions. The environmental impact on her pool's filtration system would be devastating. But none of that mattered as much as the manila envelope she found slipped under her door at sunrise, containing photographs of her pool preparation, timestamps showing her deliberate actions, and a note in Karen's precise handwriting. "Attempted murder charges are serious business, but I'm willing to negotiate. Your pool, your deck, your weekend parties, everything stops. Or everyone learns exactly what kind of person you really are. You have 24 hours to decide." Sarah stood in her kitchen, still in her pajamas, holding evidence of her own guilt while staring out at the ruined pool that had seemed like such perfect justice just hours before. Karen Morrison hadn't just survived the honey trap, she'd turned it into ammunition. Sarah's hands trembled as she read Karen's note for the 5th time, each word burning deeper into her consciousness. 24 hours. The manila envelope sat on her kitchen counter like a bomb, its contents capable of destroying everything she'd worked to build. She pulled up the security footage on her laptop, fast-forwarding through the previous weeks. Their timestamps showing her researching honey dissolution online, trips to restaurant supply stores, late-night pool preparation sessions. Karen had been watching, documenting, planning her counterattack before she'd even fallen into the trap. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 a.m. Through the peephole, Sarah saw Detective Ray Martinez from the local police department, a man she'd met during neighborhood watch meetings. His expression was professionally neutral, but his presence sent ice through her veins. "Ms. Chen, I'd like to ask you a few questions about an incident that was reported early this morning." Sarah's mind raced. Karen had actually called the police. Of course she had. But instead of panic, Sarah felt something unexpected, a cold, calculating clarity she recognized from her most challenging work negotiations. "Of course, Detective. Please come in." She led him to her living room, noting how his eyes swept the space, cataloging details. Through the back window, her ruined pool was clearly visible, its surface still showing traces of golden residue despite her early morning cleaning attempts. "I understand you've been having some issues with trespassing," Martinez said, pulling out a small notebook. "Yes, my neighbor has been using my pool without permission for weeks. I installed security cameras after the first incident. And last night," Sarah chose her words carefully, "I was awake around 3:45 a.m. and heard some commotion outside. When I checked my security system, I saw that Karen Morrison had entered my property again. Did you see what happened in the pool?" This was the moment. Sarah could lie outright, claim ignorance, hope Karen's evidence wasn't as damning as it appeared, or she could take control of the narrative. "Detective, I need to be completely honest with you. I may have made some poor decisions." Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly. "Go on." "I was frustrated, angry. Karen has been harassing my family for years. False reports to the HOA, complaints about our cultural celebrations. She even got my nephew arrested on fabricated charges. When she kept trespassing despite my efforts to secure the property, I wanted to teach her a lesson." "What kind of lesson?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I added honey to the pool water. I thought it would be unpleasant, sticky, maybe embarrassing, enough to deter her. I never intended for anyone to be hurt." Martinez scribbled notes, his expression unreadable. "Honey, about 40 pounds, dissolved in heated water. It makes the pool water viscous, difficult to swim in, but not dangerous. I researched it thoroughly. Honey is organic, non-toxic, used in wound treatment. I specifically chose something that couldn't cause chemical burns or poisoning." "Ms. Morrison is claiming you attempted to murder her." "Detective, with respect, Karen Morrison claims a lot of things. She reported my nephew for terrorism because he was wearing a hoodie. She called animal control because my cat walked through her yard. She filed noise complaints about my nephew's graduation party at 6 p.m. on a Saturday. Martinez's pen paused. Sarah could see recognition in his eyes. He'd dealt with Karen before. She's demanding we arrest you for attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and criminal mischief. I understand, and I take responsibility for the criminal mischief. I damaged my own pool and created an unpleasant situation for someone who was trespassing on my property. But attempted murder. Detective, if I'd wanted to hurt Karen, don't you think I could have chosen something more effective than organic honey? The detective was quiet for a long moment, studying his notes. Ms. Morrison mentioned she has evidence of premeditation. I'm sure she does. She's been watching me for weeks, probably longer, but premeditation to do what, exactly? Create a sticky, uncomfortable swimming experience for someone who was illegally using my property. Martinez closed his notebook. Ms. Chen, I have to ask, do you have security footage of the incident? Yes, would you like to see it? They moved to her kitchen, where Sarah pulled up the previous night's footage on her laptop. Martinez watched silently as Karen slipped through the fence, approached the pool, tested the water, and entered despite clearly noticing something was wrong. She knew something was different, Martinez observed. Yes, and she chose to continue trespassing anyway. The footage showed Karen's struggle in the viscous water, her eventual escape, and her screaming threats towards Sarah's house. Martinez replayed the section where Karen shouted about lawsuits and revenge. Ms. Morrison didn't mention she made those threats. Karen rarely mentions the parts of stories that don't support her narrative. Martinez stood, tucking his notebook away. Ms. Chen, I'm going to recommend that the district attorney's office review this case. But between you and me, I think you're looking at a misdemeanor at worst. Probably just a fine and community service. Relief flooded through Sarah, but Martinez wasn't finished. However, I need to warn you, Ms. Morrison is ... persistent. She's already called 3 times this morning demanding updates. She's also mentioned she has additional evidence that could change the nature of the charges. The blackmail photos? Sarah's stomach clenched. Detective, hypothetically, if someone were trying to extort or blackmail me using evidence of this incident, what would be my options? Martinez's expression sharpened. Hypothetically, extortion and blackmail are felonies, much more serious than putting honey in your own pool. He handed her his card. If anyone makes threats or demands in exchange for not pursuing charges, call me immediately. After Martinez left, Sarah sat in her kitchen staring at Karen's note. Her neighbor had overplayed her hand. Attempted murder charges were never going to stick. And now Sarah had a detective who clearly understood Karen's pattern of harassment. But Karen didn't know that yet. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed Karen's number. I was wondering when you'd call, Karen answered, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I've made my decision, smart girl. So we're agreed, no more pool parties, no more ethnic music during your little cultural celebrations. And you'll talk to your nephew about finding somewhere else to hang out. This is a respectable neighborhood. Sarah's jaw clenched. Even in victory, Karen couldn't resist revealing her true motivations. Actually, Karen, I've decided to counteroffer. Silence. You're going to publicly apologize for trespassing on my property and harassing my family? You're going to pay for the pool, cleaning, and equipment damage about $4,000? And you're going to stop filing false reports with the HOA, the police, and anyone else who listened to your complaints. Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. Or what? I'll destroy you, Sarah. I have photographs of you preparing that death trap. Timestamps, showing premeditation. No jury in the world will. Detective Martinez seemed to think my death trap was more like a practical joke with organic ingredients. He was particularly interested in your pattern of harassment and false reporting. The line went quiet. You called the police? Karen's voice had lost its confident edge. Of course I called. The police? Someone committed a crime on my property last night. I felt I should report it. You can't prove I was trespassing. Those cameras don't show, Karen. They show everything. You climbing under my fence? Testing my pool water? Choosing to enter? Despite knowing something was wrong, and then making threats of legal action while standing naked on my property? Another long silence. This isn't over, Karen finally said, but her voice was shaking now. Actually, I think it is. Unless you'd like to explain to Detective Martinez why you've been blackmailing me with evidence you collected while stalking my property preparations. The line went dead. Sarah walked out to her backyard, where the morning sun was burning off the last traces of honey residue from her pool deck. The water would need to be completely drained and refilled, the filtration system professionally cleaned, but the damage was manageable. What wasn't manageable was the precedent she'd set. She'd shown Karen Morrison that actions had consequences, that pushing someone too far could result in pushing back. As she stood there planning her pool restoration, Sarah didn't notice the figure watching from the second-story window of the Morrison house, or the way Karen's silhouette held something long and metallic in her hands. The war between neighbors, had just escalated beyond honey and blackmail, and Karen Morrison had always been better at long-term strategy than Sarah realized. 3 days of blissful quiet should have been Sarah's first warning. Karen Morrison never stayed silent for 3 days, not unless she was planning something that required careful orchestration. But Sarah was too busy dealing with pool contractors and insurance adjusters to notice the unusual piece from next door. The first letter arrived on Thursday morning, delivered by certified mail to her workplace. Chen Development Solutions. The envelope read an official letterhead. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the law firm's name: Blackstone, Morrison, and Associates. Of course Karen's maiden name was Morrison. Of course she had family connections to one of the city's most aggressive litigation firms. Dear Ms. Chen, our client has retained our services regarding the incident of August 15th, in which you deliberately created a hazardous condition on your property with the intent to cause harm to our client. While our client was lawfully present on adjacent property, Sarah stopped reading. Lawfully present on adjacent property. Karen was now claiming she'd never actually trespassed, that she'd somehow been injured while standing on her own land. It was brazenly false, but Sarah knew perception mattered more than truth in legal battles. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss: Sarah, need to see you in my office, now. David Park had founded Chen Development Solutions with Sarah 5 years ago, choosing to use her surname for the business because it tested better with their target demographic. They'd built the company from nothing, specializing in sustainable housing projects for middle-income families. Sarah's reputation for ethical business practices was the foundation of their success. Sit down, David said without preamble when she entered his office. I just had an interesting call from the Riverside County Planning Commission. Sarah's stomach dropped. What kind of call? Apparently someone has filed a complaint alleging that our Willowbrook project used substandard materials and falsified environmental impact reports. The caller had very detailed information about our suppliers, our timeline, even quotes from internal emails. The Willowbrook project was their flagship development: 48 sustainable homes designed for teachers, firefighters, and other essential workers. It represented 2 years of Sarah's life and most of their company's capital. David, those allegations are completely false. We have documentation for every. I know they're false. But the Planning Commission has to investigate any formal complaint, which means they're freezing all our permits until they can review our files. Do you know what that means? Sarah didn't know. Construction delays, contractor penalties, potential lawsuits from buyers whose closing dates would be pushed back indefinitely. The kind of financial catastrophe that could destroy their company. Who filed the complaint? The caller wouldn't give her name, but she claimed to be a concerned citizen who'd been researching local development projects. David's expression was grim. Sarah, the level of detail she had. This person has access to information that should be confidential. Internal company communications, supplier contracts, even our banking records. Sarah's hands were shaking. As the implications hit her, she's been hacking our systems. She or someone working for her. I've already called our IT security consultant, but the damage might already be done. David leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. Sarah, I have to ask, is this connected to that incident with your neighbor? The second letter arrived at her home that afternoon, this one hand-delivered and taped to her front door. Sarah, I tried to resolve this quietly, but you chose to escalate. Now you get to learn what real consequences look like. Your little company's dirty secrets are just the beginning. I've spent the last 6 months learning everything about your life, your business, your family. Did you know your nephew Tommy has been selling marijuana to high school students? I have photos, text messages, transaction records. One phone call to the D, and his full scholarship to UC Berkeley disappears. Your sister Jennifer's immigration status is also fascinating. Apparently there was some confusion about her paperwork when she was 16. Easy mistake to correct, but if someone were to report it now, after all these years, well, ICE doesn't usually care about technicalities. You have until Sunday to sign the settlement agreement. My attorney will deliver tomorrow $100,000 for my pain and suffering, plus a public apology admitting fault. Or everyone you care about learns what happens when you cross Karen Morrison. Choose wisely. Sarah read the letter 3 times before the full horror sank in. Karen hadn't just been watching her house, she'd been systematically investigating Sarah's entire life, gathering ammunition for a comprehensive destruction campaign. The worst part was that Karen's threats weren't empty. Tommy had been experimenting with dealing small amounts of weed to classmates, something the family was handling privately through counseling and accountability measures. Jennifer's immigration paperwork had indeed been complex when she'd arrived as a teenager, with some documents filed incorrectly that were later corrected, but immigration officials rarely bothered with nuance. Sarah's phone rang. Sarah, something weird is happening. I just got a call from someone claiming to be updating immigration records, asking about documentation from when I was in high school. When I asked for her name and department, she hung up. Jen, listen to me carefully. Don't talk to anyone else about immigration paperwork without calling our family lawyer first. And call Tommy, tell him to be extra careful about who he hangs out with and where he goes. Sarah, you're scaring me. What's going on? How could Sarah explain that a middle-aged woman's petty revenge over pool access had metastasized into a campaign of total warfare? That her attempt to teach Karen a harmless lesson had triggered something approaching genuine evil? Just be careful. Okay, I'll explain everything later. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her living room staring at Karen's letter. Through her window, she could see the Morrison house, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun like watching eyes. Karen was in there right now, probably planning her next move, savoring Sarah's anticipated capitulation. But Karen had made one crucial mistake in her letter. She'd revealed the scope of her surveillance, the extent of her research, the months of premeditation that had gone into this campaign. What Karen saw as proof of her superiority was actually evidence of something much more serious. Sarah pulled out Detective Martinez's card. Detective, it's Sarah Chen. I think I need to report a stalking and harassment case, Ms. Chen. I thought your neighbor's situation had been resolved. It's escalated. Karen Morrison has been conducting surveillance on my family for months, hacking my business systems, and making threats against my nephew and sister. I have documentation. 20 minutes later, Martinez was sitting in Sarah's living room, reading Karen's letter with increasingly dark expressions. This is way beyond neighbor disputes, he said finally. Computer crimes, stalking, potential extortion, ... Ms. Chen, have you noticed any signs of surveillance equipment around your property? Equipment, hidden cameras, listening devices. The level of information she claims to have suggests more than just casual observation. They walked through Sarah's house together, Martinez using a small electronic device to scan for hidden transmitters. In the kitchen, near the window overlooking the pool, the device began beeping rapidly. There, Martinez pointed to a small, black object attached to the underside of Sarah's window frame. Wireless camera? Probably They found 2 more cameras in her backyard, and a listening device attached to her air conditioning unit outside her bedroom window. How long has this been going on? Sarah asked, feeling violated in ways she couldn't articulate. Based on the battery life of these devices, probably 3 to 4 months. Martinez was photographing each device before carefully removing them. Ms. Chen, this is serious criminal behavior. We're talking felony charges. But she still tried to destroy my family while we're building a case. Martinez was quiet for a moment. There might be a way to handle this more immediately. You willing to wear a wire? That evening, Sarah knocked on Karen's front door carrying the settlement papers her attorney had delivered that afternoon. Karen answered, wearing a silk robe and a smile of pure satisfaction. I knew you'd see reason, Karen said, gesturing for Sarah to enter. You always seemed smarter than the other neighbors. Sarah stepped into Karen's living room, noting the expensive furniture, the professional family photos, the carefully curated image of suburban perfection. Hidden in her purse, a small recording device captured every word. Before I sign anything, Sarah said, I need to understand something. How did you get information about my business systems? Karen's smile widened. Oh, that was fun. Did you know your Wi-Fi password is your cat's name plus your birth year? Very predictable. Once I had network access, it was just a matter of time. And my family's personal information. Sarah, darling, you people put everything online. Social media, public records, your nephew's college application, essays about overcoming challenges, very touching. By the way, though I doubt UC Berkeley would find his entrepreneurial activities quite so inspiring. Karen was enjoying this, reveling in the demonstration of her power and Sarah's apparent helplessness. She had no idea that the arrest should have been the end of it. Karen Morrison, led away in handcuffs at 11:47 p.m., while her husband's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. His business trip cut short by frantic phone calls from neighbors. Sarah watched from her bedroom window as police officers carried evidence boxes from the Morrison house phones, files, documenting months of surveillance and harassment. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt hollow, drained by the realization of how deep Karen's obsession had run. This hadn't been about pool access or neighborhood disputes. This had been about control, about putting the Chen family in their place through systematic destruction. But at 3:22 a.m., Sarah's phone rang with news that changed everything. Ms. Chen, this is Dr. Patricia Valdez from County General Hospital. Karen Morrison has been brought in with what appears to be a severe allergic reaction. She's listed you as an emergency contact. Sarah bolted upright. I'm sorry. What? Why would she list me? According to her medical bracelet, she has a severe honey allergy, and she claims exposure occurred on your property. She's in anaphylactic shock. We need to know exactly what kind of honey was used and when the exposure occurred. The world tilted sideways. Honey allergy. Karen had been allergic to honey, and Sarah had filled an entire pool with 40 pounds of wildflower honey that Karen had not just touched, but been completely immersed in for several minutes. Sarah's hands shook as she dressed and drove to the hospital. In the intensive care unit, she found Karen connected to multiple machines. her face swollen beyond recognition, her breathing assisted by a ventilator. Detective Martinez was already there, along with a doctor whose expression was grave. Ms. Chen, Dr. Valdez, approached her immediately. Can you confirm that Ms. Morrison was exposed to honey on your property 3 days ago? Yes, but ... She never mentioned an allergy. She was fine when she left. She was making threats, filing lawsuits. She's been actively harassing my family since then. Severe honey allergies can have delayed reactions, especially with the volume of exposure we're seeing here. Her system has been slowly breaking down. Over the past 72 hours, Dr. Valdez's voice was clinical but concerned. She may have brain damage from oxygen deprivation before the paramedics arrived. Detective Martinez pulled Sarah aside. There's more. We found her husband Richard unconscious in his car in the hospital parking lot. Apparent suicide attempt overdose of sleeping pills with a note confessing to helping Karen with the surveillance and computer crimes. The pieces were falling apart faster than Sarah could process them. He'll live, but he's in psychiatric hold. Apparently the arrest and media attention pushed him over the edge. He's been feeding Karen information about your business. Vermont's use in his connections in city planning to help her build cases against you. Sarah sank into a waiting room chair, overwhelmed by the cascade of consequences she'd never imagined. Her simple honey trap had triggered a chain reaction that was destroying lives. Marriages, careers including potentially her own. Detective, am I going to be charged with attempted murder now? Martinez sat beside her, his expression weary. That's not my call anymore. The district attorney's office is reviewing everything. The good news is that her recorded confessions prove she was trespassing and had been planning to harm you for months. The bad news is that a severe allergic reaction changes the nature of the charges, regardless of intent. A new voice interrupted them. Miss Chen. Sarah looked up to see a woman in her 30s wearing a hospital ID badge, her expression a mixture of professional courtesy and personal pain. I'm Dr. Lisa Morrison, Karen's daughter. I'm a resident here, and I need to talk to you. Sarah's stomach clenched. She was about to face the daughter of the woman she'd accidentally poisoned, the child of someone who might die because of her honey trap. But Dr. Morrison's first words weren't what she expected. Ms. Chen, I owe you an apology. I'm sorry, my mother has been unwell for a long time. What she did to your family, the surveillance, the harassment, none of that is normal behavior, and her honey allergy isn't severe. It's mild. She gets hives and some swelling, but nothing life-threatening. Sarah stared at her. But she's in intensive care. Anaphylactic shock? She's in intensive care because she took antihistamines and anxiety medication to deal with the honey exposure, then added alcohol when she got arrested. The combination, plus the stress of everything unraveling, triggered a panic disorder that she's had since I was a child. Dr. Morrison's expression was pained but resolute. She's not dying from honey allergy. She's having a severe psychiatric breakdown. Detective Martinez leaned forward. Dr. Morrison, are you saying your mother lied about the severity of her allergy? My mother lies about a lot of things, Detective. She's been doing it my whole life. The honey allergy is real, but manageable. She eats honey and tea regularly. She just gets mild hives if she's directly exposed to large quantities. But she saw an opportunity to make you look like an attempted murderer, so she exaggerated her symptoms and manufactured a medical emergency. Sarah felt as if she'd been holding her breath for 3 days and could finally exhale. She faked. This is not faked exactly. The medical distress is real, but it's psychiatric, not allergic. The swelling, the breathing problems, those are panic and anxiety responses, made worse by her medication interactions. Dr. Morrison sat down across from them. Ms. Chen, I've been watching my mother destroy people my whole life. Neighbors, teachers, my father's business partners, even family members who don't meet her standards. You're not her first victim, and you wouldn't have been her last. Where's your father in all this? Dr. Morrison's laugh was bitter. Which one? She's been married 4 times. Richard is number 4, and the only one who is wealthy enough to fund her hobbies. The surveillance equipment, the legal fees, the private investigators she's used against other neighbors, it all costs money. Martinez was taking notes again. Other neighbors, the family before you moved away, after she got their teenage son arrested on drug charges, planted marijuana in his backpack during a neighborhood barbecue, then called the police with an anonymous tip. The couple before them lost their jobs when she somehow leaked information about the husband's immigration status to his employer. Dr. Morrison's voice was steady, professional, but Sarah could see the pain behind her clinical demeanor. My mother doesn't just have conflicts with neighbors. She systematically destroys people who don't conform to her vision of how the world should work. Sarah thought about her nephew, her sister, her business partner, all the lives that had been threatened by Karen's comprehensive revenge campaign. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of watching her hurt people, and because what happened to you was my fault. Your fault. Dr. Morrison took a deep breath. Last Christmas, she was complaining about your family's cultural celebrations. She asked me about honey allergies, claimed she was worried about bees from your garden affecting her health. I told her that while she has a mild honey allergy, it wasn't dangerous unless she was directly exposed to large quantities. The room went quiet. I gave her the idea, Dr. Morrison continued. When she heard about your honey trap, she realized she could use her allergy to escalate the situation. I think she may have even exposed herself to extra honey after the initial incident to worsen her symptoms. Martinez looked up from his notes. Dr. Morrison, would you be willing to testify to all of this? Yes, and I can provide medical records showing her actual allergy history, documentation of her psychiatric medications, and recordings. She calls me every few days to brag about her latest schemes. I started recording the calls about 2 years ago, hoping to eventually get her into psychiatric treatment. I have hours of her describing her surveillance of your family, her plans to destroy your business, even her strategy for using fake medical emergencies to manipulate legal situations. Sarah stared at this woman who looked so much like Karen, but carried herself with quiet dignity instead of venomous entitlement. Why didn't you stop her sooner? Because she's my mother, and I kept hoping she'd get better. Kept thinking that if I just set enough boundaries, if I stayed professional enough, she'd eventually see how her behavior was hurting people. Dr. Morrison's voice broke slightly. But watching what she did to your family, listening to her plan to destroy your nephew's future and your sister's legal status, I can't enable this anymore. A nurse approached their group. Dr. Morrison, your mother is awake and asking for you. Dr. Morrison stood, straightening her white coat. Ms. Chen, would you like to hear what she has to say? I think you've earned the right to witness this conversation. Sarah looked at Detective Martinez, who nodded grimly. Together, they followed Dr. Morrison into the ICU room where Karen lay connected to monitors, her face still swollen but her eyes alert and sharp. With calculation, Lisa darling, thank God you're here. This woman tried to murder me, and that incompetent detective is treating me like a criminal instead of a victim. Karen's voice was hoarse but filled with familiar indignation. I need you to document my injuries, get me released so we can pursue proper legal action. Dr. Morrison pulled up a chair beside her mother's bed, her expression calm and professional. Mother, I've